Evelyn clutched her baby close while gently feeding her beneath a soft blanket, trying to savor a moment of tender peace on the flight. The tranquility shattered when a flight attendant, whose name was revealed as Monica, abruptly stopped by her seat and declared loudly, "This is first class, you can't do that here." The remark cut through the hum of the airplane like a cold gust of wind. Evelyn froze, her heart sinking as the accusing eyes of the passengers fell upon her. No one defended her, and the silence that followed stung more than any harsh word could. Nobody knew that Evelyn was not just any first-class traveler. In truth, she had been instrumental in building this very airline, a fact known to few beyond the highest echelons of corporate power. Yet tonight she found herself on the receiving end of cruelty and prejudice that was as shocking as it was bitter. Evelyn's baby, Lily, continued to nurse, oblivious to the unfolding drama, while Monica's tone grew ever more severe. "Cover up properly or move to another area," Monica insisted sharply, her words laced with condescension and a disdain born from deep-seated bias. As heads turned and whispers filled the air, a familiar sting of humiliation raced through Evelyn's veins. Even a gentleman in a navy blue suit, Mr. Patel, lowered his newspaper, while a poised woman by the window named Grace quickly averted her eyes. The atmosphere was electric with discomfort and the sharp edge of discrimination, a reminder that some in this lofty world still clung to petty prejudices. Evelyn's eyes welled with sorrow, yet within that sorrow glowed a dormant fire, a promise of retribution she never thought she'd have to unleash. With trembling hands, she sent a concise message to her husband, Kareem, a man known for his reserved demeanor but possessing an unwavering strength in moments that truly mattered. The reply was brisk, telling her to stay put and that he would handle the situation with silent, unyielding precision. This was not the first time that injustice had scarred her life, and if it were to happen again, it would spark a powerful, resounding retaliation. The seeds of revenge, carefully nurtured over years of subtle, unspoken battles, began to blossom. Meanwhile, Monica's superiority quickly deflated when the captain of the flight, alerted by an urgent call from ground operations, instructed her to report to the cockpit. Behind closed doors, the cold truth emerged. Not only was Evelyn a respected pillar of the airline, but Monica had dared to publicly humiliate her for something as natural as feeding her child. The captain's tone carried no warmth as he relayed Kareem's icy demand for a public apology. Monica's face paled under this unexpected retribution. As she trudged back down the aisle, visibly shaken, every step seemed weighed down by the collective judgment of every silent onlooker. Meanwhile, Evelyn, serene yet silently resolute, prepared herself for the moment when the tables would turn. Her eyes met those of the passengers, and in them, a mix of empathy and quiet awe began to kindle. Tonight, justice was coming. An assertive, no-nonsense justice that promised not only to expose the ugly underbelly of prejudice and cruelty, but to retaliate in a way that would leave everyone, especially those who had wronged her, utterly astonished. Evelyn clutched her baby close while gently feeding her beneath a soft blanket, determined to savor that precious moment despite the world's cruelty. The hum of the aircraft and the gentle rocking of her seat had been her solace until the moment when Monica, the flight attendant with a haughty tone, had boldly declared in front of every soul on board, "This is first class. You cannot do that here." Her words had sliced through the calm like a dagger, leaving Evelyn stunned and mortified. In that instant, every eye in the cabin fell upon her. Yet what they did not know was that Evelyn was not just any first-class traveler. She was the visionary who had played a fundamental role in building the airline. Tonight, the very same people who had scoffed at her presence would soon bear witness to a reckoning they never anticipated. The atmosphere in the cabin had shifted from polite indifference to a heavy, oppressive tension as passengers exchanged uneasy glances and murmurs. Even Mr. Patel, donning a navy blue suit, had lowered his newspaper in disquiet, and Grace, seated by the window, averted her eyes in discomfort. Evelyn, feeling the sting of humiliation and racial prejudice, responded not with anger, but with a quiet firmness that resonated with deep sorrow and determination. Her eyes, though filled with pain, shone with an inner strength as she softly replied, "Your tone speaks louder than your words." This was not merely about a breach in protocol. It was a bitter reminder of the bias that had seeped into the very fabric of society, a prejudice that deemed her worth lesser simply because she did not fit Monica's narrow idea of what a first-class passenger should look like. Monica, now forced into the center of an unfolding drama, tried to salvage the situation with a tepid apology. "I owe you a sincere apology. There has been a misunderstanding, and I deeply regret my behavior earlier. I shouldn't have asked you to stop feeding your baby." Her voice trembled as she admitted her miscalculation, yet the apology rang hollow against the backdrop of systemic discrimination. Evelyn turned her gaze slowly toward Monica, her expression calm yet piercing as she replied, "You think it was a misunderstanding? You assumed I did not belong because of how I looked." The words hung in the stale cabin air, amplifying the conflict between them and sending shivers down the spines of every passenger who bore witness. In the ensuing silence, even those who had remained passive could not help but reflect on the enormity of the injustice. Monica's apology, though heartfelt on the surface, did little to erase the memory of her callousness. Her admission was like a bandage placed over a deep wound that needed proper healing. Behind the scenes, in the cockpit and the galley, the gears of accountability began to turn. Evelyn's husband, Kareem, a man known for his stoic demeanor and unwavering resolve, was already taking decisive action. His terse messages confirmed that Monica would face a full disciplinary review upon landing. "Monica will be met by security when the flight lands. We are reviewing your entire record." His words had been delivered without malice, yet with a firm promise of accountability. As the minutes ticked away, the division between the quiet dignity of Evelyn and the crumbling facade of Monica grew ever starker. Monica shuffled back to the galley, her shoulders sagging with the weight of her mistake. In the sterile light of the galley, she clutched the stainless steel counter, as if seeking support that never came. Nearby, Hira, a junior flight attendant whose compassionate nature contrasted sharply with Monica's cold approach, quietly stacked empty glasses and finally spoke up. "Are you okay?" Hira asked softly, a gesture that hinted at both sympathy and a quiet reprimand. But Monica, already feeling exposed and vulnerable, snapped back with a hint of bitterness. "What's that supposed to mean?" she retorted, her voice sharp and laced with defensiveness. Hira's calm response, pointing out that Monica had a history of singling out certain passengers over others purely on instinct, left no room for debate. "You watch some people like they don't belong and nobody says anything, so you keep doing it," Hira stated, her tone both matter-of-fact and sorrowful. Monica's silence in the aftermath was deafening as she realized that her past actions were catching up with her in ways she could no longer deny. In the first-class cabin, the aftermath of this confrontation began to ripple through every row and seat. Passengers who had previously turned a blind eye now observed Evelyn with a mix of sympathy, awe, and guilt. Mr. Patel, emboldened by his own sense of justice, leaned over to acknowledge that what had happened was not right. His soft-spoken apology resonating with the entire cabin. Race 2 had her fingers tapping out a message on her phone, perhaps to someone dear, as she tried to make sense of the blatant injustice she had witnessed. The unity among the passengers was palpable as they silently joined Evelyn in her struggle against discriminatory practices, many of them feeling that this flight had become about far more than just a single incident. It was about every person who had ever been judged by the color of their skin or the way they looked. As the flight continued, Evelyn remained poised and composed, holding her baby gently and reading an article on her phone. Yet beneath her calm exterior, a quiet storm of determination was building. She could already sense that this was a turning point, not only in her own life, but in the lives of countless others who had suffered similar indignities. Each heartbeat echoed with the promise of retribution. Not an act of blind vengeance, but a measured, principled stand against prejudice that had long been ignored. When her phone buzzed with another reassuring message from Kareem, instructing her to keep her focus on justice and not let personal emotions dictate her response, Evelyn's resolve only deepened. She replied with a simple, potent message. "Don't make it personal, make it policy." The revelation of Monica's past, revealed during a confidential conversation in the cockpit, added another layer of gravity to the situation. It became clear that Monica's mistreatment of Evelyn was not an isolated lapse in judgment, but part of a disturbing pattern of behavior. Captain Raymond confirmed that prior complaints had been quietly swept under the rug, handled informally, with little more than a reprimand. However, now, with Evelyn's dignified stand and the weight of her reputation behind her, those past infractions were coming to light. In the quiet hum of the cockpit, Captain Raymond's discussion with Kareem's assistant confirmed that a full hearing was imminent, one that would examine Monica's every action and hold her accountable for the deep-seated bias that had hurt not only one woman, but potentially many others. As the plane began its slow descent toward the runway, the entire atmosphere shifted from one of simmering tension to one of anticipation. The overhead sign that reminded passengers to fasten their seatbelts now carried a dual meaning, a signal that the moment of reckoning was near. The cabin was charged with electricity, every passenger acutely aware that they were about to witness a public demonstration of accountability. The collective focus was on the unfolding drama, the silent contract among those on board that injustice, no matter how subtle or veiled, would no longer be tolerated. In the final moments before landing, the stage was set for a climax that none could have foreseen. Kareem's firm instructions had already been relayed through the proper channels, and security was on high alert. Evelyn, still holding her baby close, exuded a quiet confidence that belied the pain of the ordeal. Her eyes, steady and resolute, seemed to tell every passenger that even in the face of racial bias and humiliation, dignity could triumph if one stood up for what was right. As Monica was escorted off the flight by security, the gravity of her misdeeds was made clear to everyone on board. The once haughty flight attendant now appeared broken and defeated, a stark reminder that no amount of authority could shield one from the consequences of bigotry. The final moments on the tarmac were filled with an intense, almost surreal mix of relief and heightened awareness. Evelyn looked out the window as the city lights twinkled like stars, her mind filled with reflections on the events that had transpired. Every seat in the cabin was a silent witness to her resilience, and the moment had passed beyond a personal victory. It had transformed into a collective stand against discrimination. The passengers, many of whom had observed quietly until now, felt an unspoken bond that reached beyond that single flight. They carried with them a renewed sense of purpose, a determination that every act of prejudice, no matter how subtle, would be met with decisive action. For Evelyn, the journey was far from over. The incident had uncovered deep-rooted issues that extended well beyond the confines of the airplane. It was now clear that change was imperative, and not only would her husband Kareem lead this fight in the boardroom, but she too would lend her voice to those who had been silenced by discrimination. The flight had become a catalyst for a larger movement, one that promised retribution not through violence or fury, but through the assertive, principled challenge of established norms. As she settled back into her seat, cradling her sleeping child, Evelyn felt a quiet certainty that the time for action had come. In that moment, amid the glow of departing city lights and the murmur of reflective voices, justice was on its way. A resounding declaration that prejudice in any form would be met with a response so magnificent that it would leave even the most indifferent hearts in awe. Evelyn sat quietly in her first-class seat, holding her precious baby close as Layla slept soundly against her chest. Her calm demeanor radiated a quiet dignity that had not been shaken since the tense confrontation earlier in the flight. Even though she had endured Monica's callous rebuke, her expression remained composed and serene, and the silence in the cabin spoke louder than any angry shout. As she glanced down at Layla's tiny, peaceful face, Evelyn felt that inner strength that had carried her through many storms in her long life. The gentle hum of the airplane and the soft glow of the cabin lights offered a deceptive calm that belied the turmoil brewing just beneath the surface. A few moments later, Evelyn checked her phone once more. Her heart tightened as she read a brief yet foreboding message from her husband, Kareem. The message stated plainly, "Security will be at the gate, and you will be escorted for formal questioning." Almost as if it were an inevitability that had long been building, another message followed. "I'll be waiting for you both." Evelyn's heart pounded quietly, but she responded with the measured reply that had become her mantra throughout this ordeal. "Let the process speak louder than the punishment." With that, she turned off the screen and slipped the phone back into her bag, her mind already bracing for what was to come. At the front of the plane, Monica lingered in the galley, her arms folded tightly over her chest and eyes fixed on an unseen point as if trying to escape the consequences of her earlier actions. She had not taken another step into the cabin since her forced apology, her once authoritative presence now replaced by a trembling, uncertain figure. Monica had hoped that by remaining hidden, the landing would come quickly, and that the solid ground would offer her some sense of safety. Instead, it only promised impending retribution. Hira, a junior attendant whose quiet kindness contrasted starkly with Monica's growing desperation, passed by with a tray. For a brief second, Hira's eyes met Monica's, and in a hushed tone she remarked, "They're sending someone to meet us." Monica's barely audible nod revealed that she understood perfectly the gravity of her missteps. Hira's quiet inquiry, "Do you understand why?" was met with only a slight movement of Monica's jaw as she murmured a simple yes. Hira then resumed her duties in silence, leaving Monica to face the magnitude of the damage inflicted by her own decisions. It was not merely a matter of the incident with Evelyn. It was a reckoning for every unjust choice, every instance of bias and unwarranted hostility that Monica had allowed to pass unnoticed until now. As the aircraft began its final descent, the captain's calm voice came over the intercom, reminding everyone to remain seated with their seatbelts securely fastened. Evelyn, however, found herself staring out the window, where the lights of the sprawling city below shimmered like a tapestry of hope and revelation. Having taken hundreds of flights in her lifetime, from long-haul international journeys to private charters, this flight felt profoundly different. The experience was heavier, imbued with a deeper significance, not because of any physical discomfort, but because it had exposed the raw, unsettling truth of prejudice and discrimination. In a soft whisper that seemed meant for Layla alone, Evelyn murmured, "Someday you will understand why I couldn't let it slide." When the wheels touched the runway, the anticipated burst of activity and chatter among passengers was conspicuously absent. Instead of the usual flurry of people gathering their belongings and jovially commenting on the smooth landing, a heavy stillness clung to every corner of the cabin. It was as if every soul on board sensed that the routine was about to be shattered by an event far more significant than a delayed deplaning. The aircraft rolled steadily toward the gate, its tires humming against the concrete as the plane decelerated. Inside, the atmosphere was almost tangible with anticipation. The usual banter about connecting flights and the clinking of luggage was replaced by a silent, almost eerie expectancy. Passengers in first class sat rigidly, their eyes occasionally darting toward the front where Monica still stood by the galley, her posture now noticeably slumped. Her fingers, which moments earlier had trembled with a mix of anger and fear, now nervously twisted the edge of her uniform, a sad testament to a once unyielding authority now brought low. It seemed as though Monica was waiting for a verdict, a final judgment for her transgressions. Suddenly, a soft chime signaled that the seatbelt sign had been turned off, and almost immediately a deep, authoritative male voice came over the intercom. This time it was not the captain, but another crew member announcing, "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. We kindly ask for your patience during deplaning, as there will be a brief delay for crew procedures. Thank you." Immediately, every passenger's attention sharpened. Heads turned, and an almost collective breath was held as all eyes focused intently on the unfolding drama. At that precise moment, the aircraft door swung open. Two men dressed in immaculate black suits stepped into the cabin, followed by a woman in a crisp navy blue blazer with an airline executive badge proudly displayed on her chest. Their commanding presence immediately subdued the room, halting any last vestiges of casual movement. Without a word or a smile, they strode purposefully toward their target. The lead officer paused and then, with a firm yet calm tone, announced to the stunned assembly, "Lead Flight Attendant Monica." The announcement echoed through the cabin like a dropped pin in a quiet cathedral, and every gaze turned toward Monica. Monica took a slow, shuddering breath and, with no choice but to confront her fate, wiped her hands on the side of her skirt. "Yes, that's me," she replied in a subdued tone. The woman in the blazer gave her a curt nod, and the lead officer continued, "You will need to come with us. There is an incident under review, and you have been instructed to report for immediate questioning." For a fleeting heartbeat, Monica scanned the cabin, as if searching for an escape route or a shred of justification. In that brief moment, her eyes met Evelyn's, a silent exchange that spoke volumes. Evelyn did not glare or sneer. She simply offered a look of quiet, unyielding calm as she cradled her sleeping child. That gaze, steady and empathetic, was like a mirror that refused to crack under the weight of injustice. With that, Monica was escorted down the aisle by the officers. The silence that had been building throughout the cabin deepened as passengers watched her pass, some averting their eyes in shame, others staring openly in disbelief. No one came forward to offer comfort or solace, and when Monica reached the cabin door, she turned her gaze one last time toward Hera. Yet Hera was preoccupied with helping an elderly passenger unbuckle her seatbelt, as though Monica had already ceased to exist in that moment. The door closed behind the officers, sealing Monica's fate and leaving the cabin in a heavy, expectant quiet. A long, collective exhale seemed to ripple through the cabin like the slow release of air from a punctured balloon, and yet nothing moved. Almost as if the entire space was holding its breath, the captain's voice eventually returned with a quiet announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We are now cleared to begin deplaning." Slowly, the usual shuffle began once more, but the energy in the cabin was unmistakably altered. Even those seated in the very front of the plane appeared more cautious and reflective. As Evelyn gathered her things and stood up with Layla still nestled against her chest, Mr. Patel, ever the epitome of courteous dignity, stepped aside to allow her passage. "Ma'am," he said respectfully, his eyes lowered in deference, and Evelyn nodded with a small but sincere smile, acknowledging his kindness without the need for words. Her quiet grace was unmistakable, and it resonated with every passenger who had silently borne witness to the ongoing struggle between dignity and discrimination. Exiting the aircraft through the jet bridge, Evelyn found another presence waiting at the end, a man in a tailored charcoal suit whose aura was both strong and reassuring. "Kareem," he introduced himself, extending his assistance as he gently took her bag from her shoulder and placed a tender kiss on Layla's forehead. His voice was soft yet powerful as he inquired, "You okay?" Evelyn's simple nod and her gentle reply, "We're fine," spoke volume, but as he peered into her eyes, he saw far more than calm. He saw an indomitable spirit and the weight of a battle fought with quiet valor. "I'll be back soon," Kareem assured her. "They're waiting." And with that, Evelyn gave him a look that said, "Do what is right, not just for us, but for all who have suffered in silence." Kareem's nod was the only response he needed, and as Evelyn walked away down the hall with Layla securely in her arms, Kareem moved purposefully toward the private security doors at the end of the terminal. Beyond those doors lay the epicenter of accountability, a spacious, well-appointed executive boardroom with expansive glass windows that overlooked the runway. The afternoon light streamed in, casting elongated shadows across the polished conference table. Every seat was occupied by a cadre of high-ranking officials, legal advisors, HR directors, flight operations leads, and 2 senior partners from the airline's board. Each individual sat in measured silence, the room steeped in a somber anticipation. There were no idle taps of pens, nor the familiar distractions of scrolling through smartphones. Instead, a palpable focus charged the air, as all present prepared to administer a long-overdue reckoning. At the head of the table sat Kareem, his presence resonating with quiet authority. In front of him lay a digital folder that contained every detail of the incident, a dossier so damning that it was now impossible to ignore the systemic issues underlying the humiliation of Evelyn. Kareem's silence was as powerful as any spoken word. His resolve needed no translation. Moments later, the boardroom door opened gently, and Monica was led in by a compliance officer. Though her uniform remained pristine, her posture had collapsed under the weight of consequences. The once proud and assertive flight attendant now appeared diminished, her energy depleted, as if she had spent an hour measuring just how far she had fallen and still couldn't grasp the enormity of her downward spiral. "Have a seat," Kareem said quietly, his voice imbued with a calm yet piercing intensity. Monica obeyed, lowering herself gingerly into a leather chair. Her eyes skimmed the table, avoiding any direct contact as if the very gaze of those present might expose her guilt further. Soon after, the legal director cleared her throat and clicked her pen, a simple, measured sound that punctuated the silence like a judge's gavel. "This meeting is a formal misconduct review concerning Flight 117A dated today," she began, her tone precise and unwavering. "The incident under review involves your decision to confront and humiliate a first-class passenger, Mrs. Evelyn Rahman, during a routine feeding of her infant child." The room was so quiet that every word seemed to reverberate off the walls. "Before we begin, do you acknowledge the incident as described?" the legal director inquired. Monica's lips pressed together as she replied in a barely audible voice, Yes, I acknowledge it." The next questions flowed with relentless precision. "Do you deny that the passenger had a valid first-class ticket?" asked the director. Monica's answer was a resigned, "No, I don't deny that." "Do you deny that she was following all safety protocols at the time you approached her?" came next, and once more her voice faltered with a reluctant, "No." "Do you deny that she was covered with a blanket while feeding her child?" The answer was again a soft, "No." Then Kareem's voice, measured and cutting like a cold gust of wind through a winter day, entered the conversation. "Then tell me, Monica, why her?" The question hung in the air, laden with the weight of injustice. Monica swallowed hard, her eyes darting away from the piercing stares of those gathered. "I thought," she began hesitantly, "I thought it might make others uncomfortable." The silence was deafening as the director pressed on. "Did anyone complain?" Monica's answer was a meek "No, sir." "Did you ask anyone else in first class to stop what they were doing, to move, to relocate for comfort?" Her response was a fragile shake of the head. Kareem leaned forward slightly, his tone calm but mercilessly sharp. "Then, I'll ask you again, why her?" At that moment, Monica's voice cracked as she confessed, "Because she didn't look like the others." In that instant, every person in the room felt the full force of her blatant prejudice. A prejudice that devalued Evelyn not for any misdeed, but simply for the way she looked. The revelation struck the assembled board with the force of an avalanche. Kareem's eyes narrowed as he considered the implications of Monica's admission. This was not just an isolated moment of thoughtless behavior, it was a manifestation of systemic bias, a dark undercurrent that had long haunted the corridors of power and affected countless lives. The board members exchanged silent, sorrowful glances, aware that this incident represented only the tip of a vast and corrosive problem within the very fabric of the airline. Outside the boardroom, the terminal bustled with the subdued energy of passengers who had emerged from the ordeal. Yet for Evelyn, every step was measured and deliberate as she navigated the jet bridge with her sleeping child still cradled in her arms. In that moment, the air was thick with the promise of retribution. A retribution that was not born of blind fury, but of a steadfast commitment to justice and dignity. Every detail of the flight, every icy stare, every whispered comment from fellow passengers had culminated in this singular act of accountability. Evelyn's quiet yet unyielding resolve was a beacon of grace and fortitude in a world that too often failed to honor the worth of those who appeared different. Back in the boardroom, the review meeting took on an almost sacred quality. Legal advisors and senior partners listened intently as Kareem spoke with a measured authority that left no room for ambiguity. "This is not merely about one instance of misconduct," he said softly, "but about a pattern of behavior that undermines the values upon which this airline was built." His words resonated deeply with every person present, evoking memories of countless moments when subtle acts of discrimination had been brushed aside, when voices had been silenced and dignity had been trampled. The room was charged with a mix of solemn regret and quiet resolve. It was clear that Kareem intended for this review to be more than a formality. It was to serve as a declaration of a new era, an era where discrimination would no longer be tolerated, and where accountability was not just an ideal but a commitment enforced by the highest levels of leadership. As the meeting progressed, each board member offered their perspective, their voices a chorus of determination and sorrow. They recounted instances from the past when passengers had been treated with undue suspicion, their concerns dismissed and their dignity disregarded, simply because they did not fit the conventional image of a first-class traveler. The recollections were painful, yet they reinforced the conviction that change was not only necessary but inevitable. Every word spoken in that room was laced with the shared understanding that the events of Flight 117A had illuminated deep-seated issues that went far beyond the actions of one individual. Meanwhile, in the quiet corridors of the terminal, Evelyn continued her journey with a mix of sadness and defiant hope. She had always known that the road to true equality was fraught with obstacles that often left one feeling small, vulnerable, and isolated. Yet in that moment, as she stepped off the plane and into the cool embrace of the evening air, she sensed something shifting in the world around her. The passengers who had once kept their distance now exchanged understanding looks, nods of solidarity, and quiet smiles of encouragement. Even Mr. Patel, whose respectful gesture had greeted her in the cabin, offered one final, meaningful glance before turning back to his own affairs. Evelyn's journey had not been an easy one. Over the years, she had endured countless moments of unspoken bias, subtle judgments delivered in hushed tones, and assumptions that had reduced her to a mere stereotype. Yet each of those experiences had only fortified her spirit and deepened her commitment to standing up for herself and for every other person who had been marginalized and demeaned. Now, as she moved forward from this harrowing episode, she carried with her not just the weight of her own struggles, but also the collective pain and resilience of those who had come before her. Her determination to seek justice was as much for herself as it was for every individual who had ever been made to feel invisible. Back in the boardroom, the review process continued well into the afternoon. Monica sat silently, her eyes downcast as each board member meticulously reviewed the evidence. Kareem's unwavering presence served as a constant reminder that accountability was not negotiable. The evidence, detailed reports, witness statements, and video footage of the incident painted an irrefutable picture of discrimination. Every detail was scrutinized, every word weighed against the standards of decency and respect that the airline claimed to uphold. The review was not just about punishing Monica. It was about sending a message that such behavior would be met with a response both swift and transformative. Kareem took a deep breath before he finally addressed the board directly. "Today we stand at a crossroads," he said solemnly. The actions on Flight 117A have revealed a chasm in our values, one that must be bridged immediately. We owe it to every passenger, especially those who have been marginalized, to ensure that our policies reflect the highest standards of respect and equality. This is not about revenge in the impulsive sense. It is about establishing accountability and restoring dignity. It is about crafting a future where no one is made to feel less than who they truly are, no matter their background or appearance. His words hung in the air as the room absorbed the full weight of his speech. A murmur of agreement ran around the table, punctuating the silent resolve that had taken hold of everyone present. The meeting concluded with a firm resolution. Monica would face immediate disciplinary action, and the airline would overhaul its training and policies to ensure that such incidents would be eradicated from its culture. It was a decisive moment, a turning point that promised not only retribution for the injustice inflicted on Evelyn, but also a rebirth of the airline's commitment to equality. For Evelyn, the ordeal aboard that flight became a catalyst, a spark that ignited a movement deeper than any one isolated incident. It was a call to action for every person who had ever felt diminished by discrimination, a testament to the fact that quiet strength and unyielding resolve can transform a painful moment into a powerful force for change. As she walked away from the terminal that evening, the chill of the night air mingling with the warmth of a long-awaited vindication, she felt a newfound sense of purpose. Her journey was far from over, but she carried with her the knowledge that justice was not a fleeting dream, but a promise being fulfilled by those who refused to accept injustice in silence. The events of that day would be remembered as a defining moment, a moment when the forces of cruelty and prejudice were met with a response so bold and transformative that even the most indifferent hearts could not help but stand in awe. Evelyn's quiet defiance, her unwavering grace in the face of adversity, and the resolute actions of those who followed her example were a testament to the enduring power of dignity and accountability. It was a story that would be told again and again, inspiring others to rise above mistreatment and demand a world where fairness and respect were not merely ideals, but living, breathing realities. In the days and weeks that followed, the repercussions of the incident rippled far beyond the walls of the airline's boardroom and the confines of that single flight. News of the incident spread quickly, igniting discussions across the country about the hidden prejudices that continue to plague even the most prestigious institutions. Advocacy groups and community leaders joined forces, calling for comprehensive reform and demanding that the voices of those who have been silenced be heard loud and clear. Evelyn, once an unassuming traveler, became a symbol of the strength that emerges when ordinary people dare to stand up against systemic injustice. Evelyn's story resonated particularly with older women, many of whom had navigated a lifetime of discrimination and had learned through hardship and perseverance the profound value of self-respect. Her measured, deliberate stand against humiliation and bias was a reminder that grace under pressure was the truest form of elegance, a lesson that transcended age and circumstance. For every woman who had ever been made to feel less than worthy, Evelyn's journey was a clarion call. It was time to reclaim one's dignity and demand accountability from those who would deny it. As the reforms were slowly set in motion within the airline, Evelyn's life began to take on a new meaning. Every time she stepped onto a plane, there was now an undercurrent of change, a promise that the era of silent suffering was coming to an end. Conversations about the incident, once hushed in corridors and whispered over coffee, became bold declarations. Evelyn was invited to speak at meetings and community events, where her gentle yet firm words inspired many to believe that no injustice was too small to challenge. Through all of this, Evelyn remained as humble as she had been in that fateful hour on the flight. Even as she embraced the role of an advocate and a symbol of resistance, she never lost sight of the simple truth that had guided her throughout: that respect, like love, must be nurtured and defended at every turn. And so, in the quiet moments before sunrise, as she cradled Layla and reflected on the day's events, Evelyn allowed herself a small smile of hope. She knew that true change was not measured in grand gestures alone, but in the cumulative strength of countless individuals coming together to demand a more just and compassionate world. By the time the dust had settled, the legacy of that troubled flight had transformed from a moment of personal humiliation into a rallying cry for equality. The ripple effects of Evelyn's unyielding resolve reached far and wide, inspiring others to cast aside their fears and confront discrimination wherever it reared its ugly head. And though Monica's fate served as a stark reminder of the consequences of unchecked prejudice, it also underscored the possibility of redemption, provided the system was willing to listen and change. In the end, the story of Flight 117A became a beacon of hope for those who had long been oppressed by the status quo. It was a testament to the fact that even in moments of deep darkness, there is light to be found in the quiet courage of those who, like Evelyn, stand tall in the face of adversity. Her journey, marked by silent resilience, dignified defiance, and an unwavering commitment to justice, became a timeless narrative that would continue to inspire future generations, reminding everyone that every act of discrimination can be met with a response so magnificent and just that it leaves the world and those who witness it utterly in awe. Thus, as the story of that single flight wove its way into the fabric of public consciousness, it laid the groundwork for a future where every individual was recognized for their inherent worth. For Evelyn, that future was not a far-off dream, but an imminent reality. A future where the cruelty of racism and the sting of prejudice were met with an unbreakable spirit of accountability and love. And it all began with one woman's quiet determination to rise above the disdain of a world that had long undervalued her, transforming personal pain into a powerful, unyielding movement that would change lives forever. Evelyn sat in the private executive lounge with quiet strength, still holding her precious baby close as Layla slept soundly against her chest. The room, warm and inviting with its soft leather chairs and tall windows overlooking the runway, provided a gentle contrast to the turbulence she had endured earlier. Even now, the events of the flight weighed heavily on her mind. She remembered every second of the ordeal, the humiliating stares, the harsh words, and most of all, the cold disregard for her dignity simply because she was different. With a steady hand, she gently rocked Layla while reflecting on the words that still resonated in her heart. "You won't remember this, but I will." Every second, her whisper almost meant solely for the baby, carried the promise that this painful moment would never fade into silence. Not long ago on the flight, a terse message from Kareem had shocked her heart. "Security will be at the gate. You will be escorted for formal questioning." Though her heart pounded, Evelyn replied with the calm confidence that defined her character. "Let the process speak louder than the punishment." That short reply had been both a shield and a declaration. Now, as she sat away from the bustle of the terminal, she recalled the chilling scene that followed. The silence that enveloped the cabin as Monica, the lead flight attendant responsible for the cruel confrontation, was forcibly removed from the aircraft. Monica, who once carried herself with an air of arrogant authority, now appeared a mere shadow of her former self. In the flight's final moments, as the captain calmly announced the descent and urged everyone to remain seated, Monica stood near the galley with her arms folded tightly, her eyes downcast, as though wishing to vanish. Hira, a junior attendant with a soft-spoken kindness, had confirmed in hushed tones that someone was coming for Monica. That moment of confirmation, delivered without judgment, spoke volumes about the mounting consequences Monica would soon face. It wasn't simply a reprimand for a single misdeed. It was the boiling over of years of unchecked prejudice. As the aircraft taxied to the gate, every passenger seemed to sense that something was amiss. Evelyn's gaze drifted from the twinkling city lights below to the front of the cabin where Monica remained, a forlorn figure with trembling hands. The once lively chatter among travelers had dissolved into an eerie silence, punctuated only by the steady hum of the engines and the soft chime of the seatbelt sign being switched off. In that charged moment, a commanding male voice replaced the usual cabin announcements. Passengers were asked to remain seated because deplaning was to be delayed for crew procedures. A delay that felt like an eternity to those who had witnessed injustice. Then, the aircraft door swung open and two men in crisp black suits entered, closely followed by a stern woman in a navy blue blazer bearing the airline's executive badge. The room fell even quieter as every eye turned toward the source of the disturbance. With deliberate, measured steps, the lead officer announced in a firm, controlled tone, "Lead Flight Attendant Monica." The word echoed like a verdict. Monica, now stripped of any remaining pride, took a deep breath and meekly replied, "Yes, that's me." Without any further protest, she was escorted out of the cabin, her departure witnessed in silence and heavy disapproval. Evelyn's eyes met Monica's for the briefest fraction of a second, a silent exchange that spoke of a deep, personal wrong that could never be undone. Later that day, in a stark, unforgiving boardroom filled with legal advisors, HR directors, and senior partners, Kareem presided over a formal misconduct review regarding the infamous Flight 177A incident. The atmosphere in the room was thick with gravity. As each board member listened intently to the proceedings, the legal director, with a clicking pen in hand, recounted the details of how Monica had humiliated Evelyn, who held a valid first-class ticket, by demanding she cease feeding her baby. Monica's own voice, hushed and uncertain, admitted, "I acknowledge it," when asked if she had acted improperly. But when pressed further by Kareem, whose tone was as cold and precise as a winter wind, she faltered under the weight of her prejudice. "Because she didn't look like the others," Monica confessed, the words hanging in the air like an unbearable truth. Kareem's response was measured and unwavering. 10 years, he said softly, his voice filled with disappointment. "You have worked for this airline for a decade, trusted with thousands of passengers, and you have made such calls before, quiet ones, that went unnoticed. But not this time." His words resonated like a final judgment, leaving no room for negotiation. "You should have respected her because she was a mother, a passenger, a human being," he continued with quiet finality. "The fact that she was my wife just means you picked the wrong day to mistreat someone who couldn't fight back." The legal director then announced that Monica was being placed on unpaid suspension pending further disciplinary action. The board's collective silence, heavy with disapproval, affirmed that Monica's career was not simply on the line, it was unraveling completely. Monica's fate was sealed by her own actions, and as she was escorted out of the boardroom, her reflection in the polished glass doors confirmed that nothing could undo the damage wrought by her unchecked bias. Meanwhile, the review board's decision signaled the beginning of a sweeping change. Kareem's closing statement was not one of vengeance, but one of transformative resolve. "I don't want to see another report like this again. If it happens, I won't just fix it. I will rebuild the system that allowed it." His words, resonant and full of hope, were a promise to every person who had ever been made to feel less than worthy. As the corporate communications team gathered later that evening to draft a public statement addressing the incident, the gravity of the situation continued to unfold. Emails and social media posts revealed that passengers had witnessed something truly appalling. Comments like, "What century are we in where feeding a baby in first class causes a scene?" flowed in, adding fuel to the growing fire of public outrage. In a media briefing led by Marwa, the head of PR, Kareem made it clear that the airline would not be defending the indefensible. Instead, he vowed, "Mothers will be protected, assumptions will be challenged, and appearances will never be a measure of worth on our aircraft again." It was a turning point that would echo far beyond Flight 117A. For Evelyn, the pain of humiliation had transformed into a clarion call for change. Her quiet defiance, the soft resilience with which she had borne every insult and every unjust stare, had ignited a movement dedicated to restoring dignity and championing equality. As she sat again in the quiet of the lounge, the weight of the day slowly lifting, she knew that her suffering was not in vain. Her experience had not only exposed the rotten underbelly of institutional bias, but had paved the way for a system that valued every passenger, regardless of their appearance or background. Evelyn's story, a story of silent courage and steadfast resolve, would resonate with those who had long been silenced by discrimination. In every corner of the airline and beyond, her quiet yet unyielding spirit had sparked discussions, inspired reforms, and most importantly, promised that no woman would ever have to shrink herself again for the comfort of others. The legacy of that fateful flight was now clear. The cry for justice had been heard, and a new era was dawning, a future where dignity and respect were not negotiable, but guaranteed. Evelyn sat quietly in the private executive lounge at headquarters, her eyes fixed on the memories of that fateful flight as she cradled Layla against her chest. The room, lined with soft leather chairs and tall windows that framed the runway like a stage, felt sacred in its calm contrast to the chaos she had endured. For the first time in a long time, she did not see an authoritative uniform or a boardroom verdict. Instead, she saw the face of someone who had made a habit of making others feel small. That day, in the midst of a storm of injustice, she reached for her phone, but found no comforting calls, no texts from supportive colleagues, no messages of reassurance from fellow travelers. In that moment, she felt profoundly alone with a truth she could no longer ignore. Back at headquarters, Kareem was finalizing the internal announcement that would forever alter the airline's policies. Attached to the company-wide memo were new policy drafts that declared a zero-tolerance stance on discriminatory behavior. They detailed robust measures to support motherhood and protect every passenger's right to feed their child without fear, and even established an anonymous passenger incident reporting system. The memo also mandated biannual bias awareness training for all staff. Kareem read the final line of the announcement twice before clicking send. "We do not serve customers based on appearance. We serve them based on humanity." In that simple declaration, the system began to shift. Not because of a massive press leak or a surge of public outrage, but because one brave woman had refused to let silence win. Within 2 days, whispers started to turn into conversations. A travel blogger who had been seated in business class on Flight 117A posted a thoughtful thread online. The blogger recounted witnessing a moment when a mother was told to cease feeding her baby, and how the crew's abrupt change in attitude had forced an unsettling truth into the open. The post slowly amassed over 20,000 shares. The following morning, an open letter authored by Kareem was published on the airline's website. In it, he candidly admitted that 3 days ago a woman, his wife, had been treated as though she did not belong, not because of any misbehavior, but simply because of her appearance and the assumptions made about her. His words resonated deeply. This statement is not just about one passenger, it is about every person who has ever been questioned, relocated, or shamed for occupying the seat they rightfully paid for. He ended the message with a call for a new standard of respect. Dignity should fly first class, every time. At first, Evelyn did not immediately read the statement. She heard about it from a friend, then from her cousin, and even encountered a kind stranger in a coffee shop who, with a quiet smile, said simply, "Thank you." That day, when Evelyn finally opened the post in the stillness of her home, she did so slowly, savoring every word. Layla slept soundlessly in her crib as Evelyn sat on the couch, her eyes moving deliberately over each line of the memo and the heartfelt comments from hundreds of mothers around the world. Mothers who had been forced into secret, shameful feeding rituals on flights just so they would not be ridiculed. Comments like, "This happened to me in 2018. I had to feed in the bathroom. And I have breastfed in secret on flights because I was afraid of how others would look at me. These words, written by strangers who shared her experience, pierced Evelyn's heart with both sorrow and fierce hope. Soon afterward, Evelyn received a formal statement from Monica, now stripped of her former arrogance, sent by the airline's legal office. In this statement, Monica apologized to Mrs. Evelyn Rahman, admitting without any excuse that she had treated Evelyn like someone who did not belong. Monica confessed that she had looked at Evelyn and assumed the worst, not because of any violation of rules, but because of her own prejudices. Evelyn read the statement with mixed emotions. While it did not bring triumph to her heart, it stirred within her a sense of responsibility. Monica's words, laden with regret, underscored that her actions had sparked a moment of introspection, a moment that might, one day, lead to broader change. That evening, as Evelyn prepared for bed, she closed her eyes and remembered the moment vividly. The moment when she, in her quiet determination, had refused to move or to let anyone tell her that she was less than she was. It was not about pride or applause. It was about a deep-seated need to affirm her own dignity. Her phone then buzzed with yet another message, and across town, in his office, Kareem was finalizing one last internal note for the leadership group. His message reminded everyone that leadership was not about making the loudest noise or showing off rank. Instead, true leadership was measured by the care shown to those who were often ignored. The quiet voices in the room. His email concluded with a vow to rebuild the system from the ground up if necessary, to ensure that no one would ever again be humiliated or diminished simply because of assumptions based on appearance. The very next day, news outlets picked up the story. Headlines did not scream scandalous outrage, but instead spoke of an airline that had introduced historic passenger equality policies after a distressing in-flight incident. Major parenting blogs published thoughtful pieces about the challenges mothers face while traveling, and discussions on travel forums exploded with both defensive voices and hopeful ones. Flight crews from across the country shared anonymous testimonials that exposed how they had witnessed subtle acts of discrimination, acts that, until that fateful day, had been swept under the rug. The tide of public opinion was turning, fueled by hundreds of emails sent to the airline, not just with complaints, but with heartfelt messages of gratitude. Former customers, once hesitant to fly with infants, now began expressing newfound trust in the airline. Throughout it all, Evelyn maintained a low profile. She did not seek public attention, she did not post on social media or give interviews. Instead, she allowed her quiet dignity to speak for itself. That evening, an unexpected message arrived in her inbox from the CEO of a rival airline. The message simply read, "Thank you, Mrs. Rahman. Your strength reached further than you will ever know. After reviewing our own internal policies, we have already begun rewriting them. Your experience made us reflect on something deeper, not just our customer service, but our very assumptions." Evelyn closed the message slowly, overcome by a mixture of disbelief and humility that one moment of injustice could spark transformation across the industry. Later that afternoon, Kareem gently invited Evelyn to speak at a leadership session held for senior crew members across the airline's global branches. Although public speaking was not something Evelyn had ever sought, Kareem insisted that her voice was needed, that the industry needed to hear from the person whose quiet defiance had changed them all. On that day, as Evelyn stood at the front of a packed room filled with crew leaders, instructors, and trainers, she spoke in a soft, deliberate tone. She did not begin with dramatic flair, but with honesty. "I am not here because I filed a complaint. I did not scream, threaten litigation, or even raise my voice. I was humiliated publicly for doing something as natural and necessary as feeding my child in the seat I paid for, only because I did not look like the so-called ideal first-class passenger." She shared that many women leave flights feeling they must change themselves to fit an image, and she asked those present to choose differently, to see people for who they were, rather than how they appeared. Her words, spoken with the weight of both personal pain and hard-earned wisdom, resonated in the silent room. By the end of the session, many in that room left with a new awareness, vowing to protect the vulnerable and to challenge every bias that surfaced in their work. In that moment, Evelyn had transformed her pain into a powerful catalyst for change, a change that would echo throughout the airline industry and beyond, ensuring that no mother would ever have to be made to feel small again. Evelyn's experience, a tale of quiet resilience and unyielding grace, became more than just a story of one flight. It was a vibrant, living movement, a call for justice and equality that would continue to inspire generations. Her determination, the empathy in her silent gaze, and the courage it took for her to stand firm against discrimination, had sparked a revolution in how people were treated in the skies. For Evelyn, dignity was no longer a luxury reserved for a chosen few. It was a right, and one that would now be fiercely defended every time a plane took off. Evelyn handed the microphone back to the instructor with quiet dignity and then sat down, her face serene, though her heart still throbbed with the memory of that day on the flight. There was no applause from the room, only a heavy silence that spoke volumes about what had just transpired. One by one, the crew members slowly rose to their feet, not to perform or to seek their own glory, but as a gesture of recognition that even in silence, Evelyn's strength had changed something fundamental in their hearts. Later in the hallway, Hira approached her with gentle concern. In a hushed tone, she said, "I was there on the flight." Evelyn managed a soft smile as she replied, "I remember." Hira's eyes glistened with the unspoken gratitude of someone who had witnessed quiet courage, yet felt powerless at the time. And though she longed to speak more, she admitted that fear had kept her silent then. Evelyn gently touched Hira's shoulder and said, "You didn't have to fight that day. You saw what was happening and you cared. That matters too." Hira nodded, tears of relief and remorse mixed together, grateful for the compassion now openly shared. That evening, as Evelyn left the building, she no longer felt like a victim of a humiliating incident, but rather like the catalyst for a bold movement. She had proven that change need not always roar with anger or protest, but could also arise from the steadfast confidence of a mother who refused to step aside. Over the next few weeks, the airline experienced changes that no one had ever foreseen. Policy updates rolled out across every international hub, and mandatory retraining was scheduled for thousands of employees. Every flight attendant, from the newest hire to the most seasoned veteran, was required to attend a new series of workshops that focused not only on policy, but on the deeper lessons of presence, perception, and personal bias. On the company's internal network, a digital training module titled The First Class Moment appeared. It was humble in presentation, without overproduced videos or polished actors. Instead, it began with a simple, real photo of Evelyn seated confidently in a first-class chair, her baby clutched securely in her arms, her face calm and resolute. The caption read, "She didn't speak loudly, but the world heard her anyway." Employees were instructed to study the case, review the timeline of events, and answer reflection questions designed to help them examine how their assumptions could harm others if left unchecked. But the ripple of change extended far beyond those training modules. In an unprecedented move, 4 other major airlines came together to sign a joint agreement titled the Passenger Respect Initiative, promising to enforce clear protections for breastfeeding passengers and re-examine the role of unconscious bias in in-flight service. Several international media outlets soon dubbed it the Amina effect, even as Evelyn, whom everyone now recognized as the woman from that fateful flight, remained modest and grounded. Her routines did not change. She still cared for Layla, read her quiet favorite books in the evenings, and took gentle strolls through the nearby park with Kareem. Despite the newfound recognition, she did not chase the spotlight. Instead, the story of her quiet defiance resonated deeply with countless mothers and travelers alike. who approached her on grocery trips, pediatric visits, and even at casual dinners. People would say, "You're the woman from the plane, right? I read your husband's letter, but it was your resolve that changed my mind." And those words, coming from fellow mothers and ordinary people, bolstered her spirit. One evening, as Evelyn stepped into her warm kitchen to make a cup of tea, her phone buzzed with a new email. Initially, she intended to ignore it, just another message lost among many in her inbox. However, the subject line made her freeze. "Final note. From me, if you'll read it." With trembling hands, she opened the email. It was from Monica, the very flight attendant responsible for the earlier humiliation, sent without the formality of corporate templates or legal shields. In this raw, unadorned message, Monica addressed her as Mrs. Rahman and began, "I know you've moved forward." Monica confessed that she had witnessed the changes Evelyn's courage had inspired and admitted that she had lost her job the previous week. "I don't say this for pity," Monica wrote, "but because it was fair. I earned it." She continued to explain that for too long she had measured people by instinct instead of empathy, determining who deserved kindness merely based on appearance, attire, and preconceived notions. She admitted with remorse, "I believed I was protecting something when really I was protecting my own comfort." Monica confessed that the moment when Evelyn had stood there, quiet yet unyielding, had shattered her self-delusion, and she now planned to start therapy to rebuild her understanding of compassion. "I may never work in aviation again," Monica wrote solemnly, "but I promise my daughter will see a mother who learned to be better, even if it's too late for one career. Thank you for showing me the person I should have been all along." Evelyn read the email twice, her eyes welling with an emotion that was neither triumph nor pity, but rather a profound sense of peace. She replied with only one sentence, "Change means more when it comes from the people who once caused the harm." That night, as Evelyn sat on the edge of Layla's crib, watching her daughter's small chest rise and fall in the quiet of the nursery, she whispered softly, "I didn't plan for any of this, but maybe it was always bigger than just me." Later, her phone rang with a terse message from Kareem. "Board ready, your call." Evelyn stared at the screen, a mix of anticipation and resolve in her eyes. For the first time since that tumultuous flight, she realized she not only had a voice, but also a choice that she was now determined to exercise fully. The boardroom that awaited her was larger and brighter this time, designed not for cold judgment but for a visionary purpose. Screens lining the walls displayed bold headers like inclusive passenger experience, breaking bias in the skies, and the Amina standard. Every department head was present: operations, HR, marketing, training, legal, finance, and even some outside partners from other airlines observed quietly. Evelyn stood confidently at the front, not as a guest, not as a victim, and certainly not merely as a wife of a high-ranking executive. She was there as a leader, a beacon of change forged in the crucible of personal adversity. Taking a deep breath, Evelyn addressed the room with a calm, measured tone that resonated like a gentle clarion call. "Let me be clear. I don't want to be remembered simply as the woman from that flight, nor as the mother who caused a scandal, or just as someone's wife. I stand here because I was once made to feel like I did not belong, in a seat I rightfully earned, simply for holding the child I brought into this world," she continued, her voice steady and powerful. "I was told I made others uncomfortable just by existing, and that moment of humiliation was not an isolated incident, but a reflection of a systemic attitude, an attitude that now must be changed." The room was silent, every eye fixed on her as she outlined a series of transformative policy proposals. Every cabin crew member, every gate agent, every customer service representative would now be retrained not just to follow rules but to question their assumptions. Passengers would have the right to report mistreatment anonymously, and every mother, whether in economy or first class, would be guaranteed her full right to feed her child without interference or shame. Evelyn then paused and, with a determined glance at the screen behind her, continued, "We are also changing how our uniforms are presented because appearances should never be the measure of worth." Her speech, full of quiet conviction and undeniable truth, left the entire room in reflective silence. In that moment, Evelyn's soft yet resilient defiance had sparked a wave of accountability that promised lasting change. As the meeting concluded and the room slowly emptied, Evelyn felt a deep, bittersweet satisfaction. The journey that had begun with a humiliating act of discrimination had evolved into an industry-wide revolution, a testament to the enduring power of one person's insistence on dignity, respect, and humanity. And as she stepped out of the boardroom that day, Evelyn knew that the legacy of her courage would continue to light the way for countless others who, too, had once been made to feel invisible. Evelyn stood in the boardroom as the final words of the meeting echoed in the silence. The room of executives and high-ranking officials, usually filled with rigid protocol and polished appearances, now listened intently to a declaration that would forever reshape the company. No more coded language that uses polished appearance to silently punish racial or cultural expression, she said in a clear, unyielding tone. We are updating our diversity definitions to include economic bias, and we are building internal teams that reflect the faces of the people who fly with us, not just the ones who run the boardrooms. Her voice, steady and deliberate, carried the weight of all those years of quiet suffering and hidden indignity that she had endured simply for being herself. Evelyn turned back to the assembled leaders, her eyes blazing with determination. This is not a press moment. This is a movement. You do not have to stamp my name on it. I do not want that. What I want is for the next woman, the next mother, the next quiet passenger who looks like she does not belong to be able to sit in her seat, hold her child, and be treated with nothing but dignity. For a long moment, there was silence in that room. No applause, no fanfare, only a deep, resounding acknowledgement of the truth in her words. It was a moment in which even the most senior among them could not ignore the raw power of her conviction. Kareem, standing at the side, watched her with an unreadable expression that soon softened into quiet pride. In his eyes was not only the pride of a husband, but of a man who had witnessed firsthand the transformative strength of a person refusing to be diminished. When the meeting concluded, Evelyn did not linger for photographs or handshakes. Instead, she gathered her notes, gave Kareem a respectful nod, and quietly exited the room. As she walked down the hallway, she passed a striking photo display of the airline's storied past. Portraits of founders, past CEOs, and legendary pilots whose names had once been carved into the very foundations of the company. Evelyn paused for a moment, then said to herself, "Let them have their photos. I will take the future." Outside, the sun was setting behind the runway, its golden light spilling across the glass walls and casting long, dramatic reflections of her figure. Reaching her car, Evelyn saw Layla waiting with a caretaker seated in the back. With tender care, she leaned over, kissed Layla's forehead, and buckled her in gently. Sliding into the driver's seat, she noticed her phone buzz with a new message from Kareem. "They've started calling it the Amina Standard. Thought you should know." Evelyn stared at the screen for a moment, a soft smile playing on her lips, and replied simply, "Let them call it whatever they want. I'll keep doing the work." With that, she started the car and the engine hummed quietly, a hum that echoed like the promise of a new beginning. Driving forward, Evelyn did not merely merge into the night or the everyday traffic. She was driving into the future. A future she had helped shape not only for herself, but for her daughter and for every silent passenger who had ever been made to feel that they did not belong. A future where a woman would never again be asked to move simply for feeding her child, or judged by the color of her skin, or the way she expressed her cultural heritage. Her journey, which had begun on a flight filled with quiet humiliation and piercing judgment, had evolved into a revolution of accountability and respect. In that moment, as her car merged with the darkening highway, Evelyn reflected on how far they had come. The changes sweeping through the airline, mandatory bias awareness training, revised policies on passenger dignity, and even a new policy that ensured every mother's right to feed her child comfortably, had not just been responses to a single incident. They were the result of a collective awakening. A shared realization that deep systemic change was possible when one courageous woman refused to remain silent. As she drove into the night, the soft glow of the dashboard and the reflective gleam of the moon provided a quiet backdrop to her thoughts. Evelyn understood that the battle against prejudice and injustice was far from over, but she also knew that her voice, once so timid in the face of judgment, had now become a symbol of empowerment for countless others. Her decision to stand firm had ignited a movement that would ensure that in every seat on every flight, dignity, respect, and humanity were not just ideals, but guarantees. And with that powerful thought warming her heart, Evelyn drove onward, a true pioneer of change, determined to shape a future where every passenger was cherished for exactly who they were.